Thank you so much for coming today. So my name is Janice Winkler, and I'm a librarian here on the social sciences team. There's not going to be really any subject-specific content today, so this should apply, broadly to instructors, researchers, and even students throughout the university. There we go. Okay. So essentially the structure of today's session is that we'll start with me providing a little bit of background information so that you understand kind of the purpose of Pressbooks and how it can be used. And then we'll move into using Pressbooks, and that should be the second half or more of the session. So I'll do some demos, and then we'll work through some activities together. So just for the background information, I do need to provide, I think, some information on OER just in terms of basic definitions. So we're all on the same page about what we mean when we say OER, what I mean when I say OER, and where we can actually find OER to adapt. So the session, I believe the title of the session today is Adapting and Creating OER using Pressbooks. And so when we're talking about adapting OER, we need to ensure that first of all, we have something to start with, and second of all, that licensing is appropriate. And so we have a little section here on open licenses so that we can ensure that we're not violating copyright or anything like that. And then, of course, some information on how to get help, because licensing can be a little bit difficult to navigate. And that's where we'll talk about Pressbooks. I'll provide just sort of a basic overview of the dashboard so that you're familiar with navigating it and you're comfortable with that. And from there, we'll get into the activities. And I hope by the end of this session, everyone will be reasonably comfortable with navigating Pressbooks, and we'll have resources for further help, and we'll be comfortable coming for more help as needed. Okay. So in terms of this kind of OER 101, I just want to provide a quick definition, and I'm actually going to start with the second half of the term OER, which stands for Open Educational Resources. So just starting kind of backwards with that educational resources piece. It's a really broad category. Almost anything could be an educational resource. So oftentimes when we're talking about OER, we think open textbooks, open access textbooks. That's a very common application and use of OER. And that to some extent will be what we're talking about today, but not entirely. There are other kinds of OER, and that can include anything like assessments. So that can be assignment guidelines. There are open text or test banks, although I suppose they're not that open because usually instructors have to verify their identity to get access. Things like course materials like could be reading lists, could be anything. Software when it is used for educational purposes, that is an OER. Multimedia, so images and videos. In fact, this slide deck is licensed under a Creative Commons license, and I'm reusing it in that context. And I will provide the attribution statement for that at the end. And in fact, if you've ever assigned an article for reading for students and it happens to be open access, I mean, that in a small way is using OER, because it's really any kind of educational resource or any kind of research resource when it's used for educational purposes, if that makes sense. The open part is a little more tricky. Typically, we mean materials that are openly licensed. So David Wiley talks about the 5 R's of OERs. And so these are essentially the permissions that a user should have in order to engage with the OER. So they should be able to retain a copy and reuse it kind of as they need, and revise and remix. So both of these refer to adapting resources, which we'll talk a bit about today. So kind of editing things that are already in existence. Revising is just that kind of, it's what it sounds like, making the edits, maybe adapting something to your local context or whatever. And remixing refers more to kind of taking different pieces of different open resources and putting them together into something new. And then, of course, whatever is created with this needs to be redistributed. And so all of that is what needs to be, these are the 5 criteria that need to be met in order for something to qualify as open or openly licensed, at least according to David Wiley, and he is kind of a thought leader in this area. Typically, this is accomplished with Creative Commons licenses, and we'll go back to that in a moment. But first, I just wanted to share some places that you might want to or might be able to find OER to adapt. And so I won't go into too much detail. The list is almost infinite here. So I've developed a list of kind of some good starting places. So there are a couple of major curated lists where I would start. One of them is one we've created here at the university called the OER by Discipline Guide. And from there, if I'm not finding anything, I like to go into the Open Textbook Library, and then Campus Manitoba Open Textbook Collection and eCampus Ontario's Open Textbook Collection are there's similar, there's a lot of overlap, but they also have some unique content. So those are the major curated lists that I like to consult when I'm looking for material to adapt. You can also check OER publishers, and the main one that I would recommend there is OpenStax. They create really high quality materials, and oftentimes they are just kind of textbooks that come with additional materials like slide decks, that kind of thing that make them easier to adapt in resources, or yes, adapt in courses, sorry. So the next category I have here is aggregation/adaptation platforms. So there's a couple, Merlot and OER Commons. They both kind of gather OER from lots of different sources and allow you to adapt them right there on their platform. So we'll be talking today about adapting resources with Pressbooks, but I just kind of wanted to flag that for you, that there are other places you can do that. Those resources, Merlot and OER Commons for adaptation, tend to be more commonly used for things like handouts, like smaller resources. So it's kind of a way for instructors to share resources with each other, reading lists, that kind of thing. So it's a little easier to adapt at a smaller scale in that sense. And I will warn you that OER Commons does have a strong kind of K-12 education bent, whereas Merlot has more of that kind of post-secondary bent, but they both have a lot of crossovers. The final category is something librarians would call federated search. So that would be like one search tool or technology that's designed to search multiple other sources. So the main ones here are Oasis and Mason OER MetaFinder, or MOM. So these ones are fine. I find them really overwhelming. They usually return a really, really huge number of results, and oftentimes they're not quite what I was looking for. And so I do find it useful to start with more curated lists and then kind of move into broader and broader resources as needed. A resource I have not mentioned here is just Google, but an advanced Google search actually can be pretty good. And they do sometimes allow you to filter by licenses. So we can talk about that later if that is something you're interested in. I didn't want to get too far into finding OER today because it's not really what we're talking about, but just getting a sense of kind of, there are places that you can look for OER, and there's kind of, they fall under broad categories. And then once you've found something, oftentimes you'll find this is great, but it's not exactly what I'm looking for. And now I want to adapt it. So that's kind of the use case there. So again, I've talked a bit about this as if we're talking about open textbooks, and certainly that's kind of what the platform is designed for, not necessarily open textbooks, but open books in general. It is designed for the structure of a book, but you can put other projects in there so long as you kind of map them to the structure of the book. And so as we talk today, I'll be talking about parts and what's the other one? Chapters. But you know, something that goes into the category of a chapter or is referred to as a chapter doesn't necessarily have to be a chapter of a book, if that's clear. So I just wanted to share a couple of examples, and I'll pull them up now just so you can get a sense of some ways that others have used Pressbooks. Sorry. Can I get that up here? Yes, I can. Great. And here we go. That others have used Pressbooks for something that's not quite a traditional book publishing project, although again, that is kind of what it's designed for, but there are ways to kind of use the platform differently. So I just wanted to share. The first one is something we would think of as like an open pedagogy project, where you can see the authors list here is very long, and that's because this is actually created by a class. So this is a resource where students, instead of writing a term paper and submitting it to their professor and nobody ever seeing it again, they create a resource that can be shared online. So this was a project where the students talk about their experiences with COVID-19. And so they're kind of trying to map their experiences to things that they're learning about in the course. So that's the assignment there. And as you can kind of scroll down. So this is typically what a Pressbooks looks like. We have the cover page here, the title, all of the authors, the licenses here. I just want to quickly draw your attention. This license is actually for the public domain. So the authors have decided to release this into the public domain. Technically, we don't actually have to provide any kind of attribution for them, although from an academic perspective, obviously it would be appropriate to cite them. Sorry, I'm just seeing something in the chat. If you're not able to see the examples, I'm so sorry. Okay. Well, let me just do a new share then. I thought I was sharing my whole screen. Okay. Is this working for everybody? Wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate that feedback. Okay. So we're seeing, and now I'll show you again. We've got the title. They've created a little book cover page here, and then many authors. And this is the class. So here you can see they've put this into the public domain. So that's something they've chosen to do. There's a couple of ways I could read this. I can click read book and it will take me to the first chapter, usually an introduction, something to that effect. And then I can kind of click through the pages that way, navigate through as if it was a book. I always like to scroll down and take a look at the contents. And so in this case, what they've done is they've had each student write a chapter. So you can see we can separately credit each chapter to a different author. And so this is organized into chapters. So, I mean, I don't know that I would say strictly that these are book chapters, right? They're assignments, the papers. I guess the closest I would map it to would be like an edited volume, right? Where there's many different authors. And so each of them has written what they're referring to as a chapter. And then this is organized into parts, so like a section of a book. And so the term Pressbooks uses is parts. And I just want to kind of keep using that terminology because once we get in the back end of Pressbooks, it will start telling us, like, do you want to add a part and things? I want to make it clear what that means. So you can see they've kind of organized it this way. And I'll scroll down to the bottom. I want to show you, it does have some information on the license. And if there was any other information here, like if this was adapted from another source, then the attribution for that original source would automatically have been imported here. And we'll see that later today. The other one I wanted to show you is from a project in Ontario. So this is kind of a catalog that they've created of or from a art exhibit, which I think is really neat. So again, not a traditional book, but they've kind of mapped it to a book structure. They've applied, again, the license is available here. This is a much more restrictive license, which I'll explain shortly. And in this case, you can see they've used different parts and chapters differently. So they've got a catalog and they're talking about the different artists. Each artist gets their own chapter. So again, so this is kind of what it looks like when it's kind of final and available and finished. Okay. To the slides. Okay, so before we move on to talk about open licenses, are there any questions about anything that I've gone over so far? Okay, I'm not seeing, oh, there's something in the chat, I think. Oh, great, okay. Good, thank you. Okay, so then we'll move into licensing. If I can make the slides go, I can, great, okay. So I just wanted to go over some OER friendly licenses. So these are things that you can adapt essentially. So I'm starting with the public domain. That's cheating a little bit because strictly speaking, something in the public domain is not under any kind of license. So it usually is because something has aged out. of the public domain. So this would be more appropriate if you're looking at compiling literature from a literature class, focusing on authors who were writing, 100 years ago or something like that. So that's the time that I would use that public domain license. So copyright usually expires after 50 years after an author dies, although it looks like that will be extended to possibly 70 years soon. So that is the kind of thing that I rely on the Copyright Office to help me navigate. But for now, we're looking at kind of author's death, year of author's death plus 50. As we saw early on, authors can voluntarily commit their work to the public domain, and so they would do that usually with a Creative Commons 0 license. And so in so doing, I'm saying, give up all rights to this. You can do what you will with it. You don't even have to cite me. Again, because we're academics, we always cite our sources anyways, but that is an option. It's not common, and I don't know that I would necessarily recommend it for academic purposes, but I think it's kind of interesting to consider pros and cons to that. I would love to know why those students or why that class decided to use the public domain. I think that's really interesting. Open source software licenses can also be used, and so something using an open source software license can often be adapted, and that is part of the open source software kind of process. Is that kind of the part of the purpose is that it can be adapted to different purposes and built upon and all of that stuff. These are less commonly used in teaching and research, and I have to say I'm not quite as familiar with them. We'll talk mostly about Creative Commons licenses. So these are really the most commonly used in academic publishing. If you've ever published an article open access in any way, you've probably used Creative Commons licenses. They're fairly common and pretty standard at this point. I just wanted to give you a sense of what the different kind of options are. And again, because I think many of us, when we're publishing and the publisher suggests we put a particular license on things, we don't pay too much attention, we just go with it, right? So just to give you a sense of what these mean. All Creative Commons licenses, except for that rarely used CC0 license, require attribution. And that's when you see a license that says CC by something, CC by, the by is the attribution part. So you can say, or you can come across a resource that's licensed so that, you can reuse it any way you like, but you must attribute the author. Attribute this to the author. Non-commercial license is the second icon we have here. This is that CC by NC. So often authors decide, I'm happy with releasing this into the public domain. I'm an academic and I don't tend to make money off my writing anyways, but I don't want other people making money off my writing. And so that's a time that you might want to apply a non-commercial license. The next license we have here is share alike. So CC by essay is share alike. And so that is the idea that any new product developed out of the original license or the original product then has to come with the same license. Sometimes this is called a viral license. The whole idea is that if others are using it, they should share it too. And it sort of will snowball into something bigger is the idea. No derivatives is the final option. So this would be CC by ND. ND is no derivatives. And that's that little equal sign here. And that's where we say, like, you cannot adapt this at all. And so in this case, because we're talking about adapting resources, if you came across something with a CC by ND or anything that had ND in it, that indicates that you actually cannot adapt it. You can still lift large portions, like a full chapter. If you see, for example, a published book. So I would say a lot of open access books that I find that are published open access originally, like through open presses, will come with this CC by ND or CC by NC ND, something like that. And you can just take a chapter out of that and put it in your book. That's fine. The point is that you can't edit the chapter. You can't change it in any way. So, so that's kind of how we interpret those as a user. And I just wanted to be clear that these can be recombined in different ways. So we've got a kind of typical straight up attribution license here, and that's the slide deck that I'm using today is under CC BY license. And then that can be combined with a non-commercial or share alike. So you can see how these kind of mix. The only two that cannot be remixed or adapted, so we could not use for adapting today, are the no derivatives licenses. So I just want to kind of draw your attention to the fact that, of course, we're almost all not just users of work, but we're also creators of work. And so in choosing a license for our own work, there's a couple of things we need to consider. So if we adapt something and then put it on Pressbooks, the first thing we need to make sure is that obviously that it's permitted at all, that there's no CC by ND, non-derivative license on it. But also if the work has any share alike criteria, you have to use the same or a comparable license. And I also, I like to encourage people to think about the downstream uses of their work. What will people do with your work once, once you've published it? What will they need to do? And then what limitations might any of these restrictions impose? I find, because I am often advising people about kind of reusing these types of resources, it might seem like share alike or something like that is, well, it can't hurt to put on or something, but I do find it does happen that it can make the adaptation of the work a little bit more difficult. So that's just something to keep in mind and think about as you go. So I have some further resources because I know copyright and Creative Commons and all of that can be a little difficult to navigate, and in particular, some people tend to be a little cautious about copyright, which is totally reasonable. And so I just wanted to help you kind of navigate that. So if you have basic questions about Creative Commons licenses and kind of navigating the type of thing we've talked about today, your liaison librarian can help with that. I have a link here. I can share the slides by email with everybody attending today. So, your usual contact with the library should be able to help. We also have a library guide on Creative Commons on our website, and it's meant to, again, help you kind of navigate that. Once we get any further, once we're looking at different licenses and it's not clear, do they all work together, and how do I know if something's in the public domain and all of that stuff, that's when we usually bring in the Copyright Office, and they are fantastic and very experienced and very comfortable with Creative Commons and with OER. So this would not be a big surprise to them if you were to approach with this kind of question. So very much would encourage you to use them or their services as needed. Okay, so that kind of covers what I wanted to talk about in terms of open licenses today, and we can get into Pressbooks, but first just wanted to make sure, is everybody clear on kind of how open licensing works and everything we've talked about? Are there any questions about anything I've talked about so far? Oh, good. Thank you. Okay, great. I'm glad. So we can get into Pressbooks. That's fun. Okay, so I'll start by providing an overview of features, and as I said, then we'll kind of move into some activities and going back and forth between demos and activities. Great. So first of all, I just want to be clear about how our Pressbooks license works. It is a little bit confusing because it seems like, well, at the University of Manitoba, we have a Pressbooks license, and so people want to find it on the University of Manitoba website or whatever, and you can, it is on the website, but it will redirect you to Campus Manitoba, which is a really neat organization that's funded by the government, and it has, part of their mandate is open education. And so they have this license that they provide to post-secondary institutions across the province. And so we have kind of done an additional build-on license so that our work, anything that we publish here, will be added to the Campus Manitoba network. The reason we've wanted to do it that way, well, there's a few reasons, but one of them is it's quite difficult to find OER when they're all kind of siloed in separate places based on the institution. And so this is a way that we can get all of the Manitoba OER in the same place, and at least it'll be a little easier for others to find our work, hopefully reuse it, cite us, all of that stuff. So in order to access it, you go through that Pressbooks license or network. So I think, out of an abundance of caution, because I occasionally do have issues with account setup, I had asked that everybody here today be provided with a sign-on. So I hope that you have received an email earlier this week from Pressbooks just indicating that you had an account set up. Normally, we actually don't need to do that with faculty and staff, but I had added you just in case. And then with students, usually we need to manually set up accounts. So that's what we've done here. Were there any issues in creating those accounts, or was that okay for everybody? Thumbs up. Great. Wonderful. Okay, thank you. Thanks so much. Okay. So just wanted to kind of go over what Pressbooks is. It's actually built on top of WordPress. So if you've done any web editing, web content creation anyway on WordPress, which is a pretty common tool, it will look very familiar to you. So they've taken the WordPress kind of as a platform and built additional tools on top of it that are specialized for publishing. And educational publishing, especially. So as I've said, the content can be organized into parts and chapters. You can embed multimedia content. And one of the things that I find most exciting about this resource is that it comes with this import function, which facilitates the adaptation of existing open content. So oftentimes we find content online, it's got an open license, so technically we can adapt it, but it's in a format that makes it very difficult to adapt, or, the whole thing is on a HTML web page, and how do I get that? So, so Pressbooks actually has an import feature to pull content into the Pressbooks, into a new Pressbooks, and adapt it that way. It works pretty well. They take any content or any coding that comes with it so that it should come with its formatting. And that's how they decide to break things down into different chapters and things. Mostly great. Does not work for PDFs. PDFs are just the bane of my existence at this point. They're not very editable. Okay, so there are also some features that I am going to talk about in a little bit that make it ideal for publishing in an educational context. So it has some built-in formatting so that, for example, if you're using or if you want to add an example to your text, you can kind of highlight it, click example, and now it's formatted in a consistent way across the text. And I don't know how clear that is, but I'll show you, I'll demonstrate shortly. It has interactivity capacities using H5P, which we'll provide today. I do find that one a little bit higher in terms of a learning curve, but the opportunities that it presents are really, really neat. H5P is really designed for interactivity, and specifically was designed for teaching and learning. And so it has all kinds of options for different types of activities that you can create. And we'll test one out today, hopefully, if we have time. It also has the capacity to incorporate Hypothesis, which is a web annotation tool. So also really useful for students. They can highlight different portions and add an annotation. And so oftentimes I'm seeing even as an assignment, like instead of, posting on Learn, answer the following reflection question. You can have the students actually go into the text itself and annotate it directly there, respond to each other there, ask questions, kind of engage that way, which is kind of neat. If you use any math, by default, it uses this MathJax formatting tool. You can activate Quick LaTeX if that's something you would like to do. It's entirely outside of my area of expertise, so I will gloss over it. But if you're comfortable with it, then that's something that you can use. It also has a lot of features for accessibility purposes. If we're creating any kinds of resources for teaching and learning at this point, we have requirements to accommodate our students with disabilities, and so it is able to do that. Okay. So all this said, I will open up the dashboard, and I'm just going to go through. Okay, I'm going to go through and kind of show you what it looks like if I can remember. Okay, great. So here's another example of a Pressbook that's not strictly a book. It's something we created here. I think we have somebody. One of the participants today was one of the co-authors on this along me and another group of librarians here, where we kind of gathered a number of different resources, and we kind of grouped them into chapters based on department and faculty. So each faculty has its own part, and each department has its own chapter if it was a big enough department or had enough resources to warrant that. So this is just a list of open educational resources that we've identified for different disciplines here at the university. So because this is a fairly fleshed out book, I'm going to use it as an example. So at the top, I've clicked admin, and it's going to take me to the back, the dashboard. So this is kind of what it looks like on the back end. So the dashboard it's kind of a high level overview. I can see really quickly my users, so the co-authors, right? Anybody who's been added to this resource, list of chapters, and I can go straight to any of the chapters and click on them to edit them at this point. I'm not going to. I'm just going to show you the menu on the left, just to give you a sense of how to navigate this. And then we'll go into certain sections as part of the activities later on. So the first thing I wanted to share is just that I have the capacity to look at my catalog. So if I have multiple books, sometimes people will have kind of a test book, that kind of thing. And so I can kind of navigate between them by clicking on my catalog and then choosing a book. It has this neat analytics feature that I really like to play with that will show me, so this is in the past month, how many visitors have I had on my book and which chapter were they at and which URL referred them and all of that stuff. It's a lot of fun to play with. And okay, the next part is organize. So I'll just click organize. So this is where I can really see all of my chapters and sections. It's organized in a fairly visual way, but might be a little more complicated to look at than the initial overview in the dashboard. So I wanted to highlight a couple of features here. If I want to reorganize my chapters, this is where I do it. So I can mouse over any given chapter and click move down, move up, so I can reorder them that way. There are also a lot of options here in terms of showing in web, showing in export. So if I want to publish this book, but just not one chapter, I can just remove it from the web, remove it from the exports that way. And so I have some granularity there. Was there something else I wanted to show you? Oh, if I wanted to edit the chapters, I can just mouse over them and click on them to open them up, which we will do in a little bit, but I'll just skip that for now. So back to the menu on the left, this is an easy way I can add parts, add chapters, and add front and back matter. So front and back matter is like, it's really just a part, but obviously it goes either at the front or the back, but it also has some kind of built-in formatting. So for example, back matter, there's a section or there's an option to create a glossary chapter that you don't have for your other, that's not an option in the other parts. If you create a glossary chapter and you have added in glossary terms, then any glossary terms in the book that you've added will automatically be added to the glossary chapter at the end. So there's just some kind of built-in formatting that way that you can play around with. And of course, I can delete chapters here as well. Okay, let's see, I'll look at the book info really quickly. So this is just where I put in, so as librarians, we call this metadata. So it's title, abstract, description, whatever you want to put in here. And you can see I've put in all our contributors, publication date, all of that stuff. If I had an ISBN, which you can acquire, but we don't have a system in place at the libraries to do that, but you can do it. Then that's where it goes. This is where I upload the cover image, and the cover image for our book I actually created in Canva using a book cover image template. So it actually is not as complicated as you would expect to create something like that. And then let me see, I think it's contributors I wanted to show you as well. Okay, so I can kind of see all of the contributors here. This is not, sorry, there's something I wanted to show you, but it might be in the dashboard. Let's see. Users. Oh, I'm sorry, it's further down. Okay, so I'll show you the users section, which is on the left-hand side. Just the reason I wanted to show you this, and just to be clear, everybody here is kind of publicly credited and publicly has their emails accessible. So I hope everybody is comfortable with this. But what I wanted to show you is that I can see everybody's role here. And so there are different roles that can be created. So whoever creates a book is provided this role of administrator. So that's me at the bottom here. Others I've added as editor, but I can give them more or less privileges based on kind of what their role in the project is. So if I was hiring, for example, a student assistant, I might not want them to have access to the whole book. I might not want them to have unfettered access to the book. And so this is my opportunity to kind of change that. There's a table that Pressbooks has that discusses kind of the different roles of so we have administrator here, editor, you can see subscriber. So there's different roles that are available, and it shows kind of what permissions are available to each one. So again, this is good for working on a team. If you have questions about that, we can certainly go through that table as well later on. So let me go back up in the menu here. This is where we can play around with the appearance. For the most part, I try not to do that because I don't want to mess with the coding in any way, because I don't want it to be that kind of Pressbooks updates something and now everything's broken or something, right? So if you're comfortable with coding, if this is something you like to do, there is an option here on the left again to create these custom styles. But for the most part, I would suggest just sticking with kind of the default styles that are available. There are actually quite a few options. So I guess depending on kind of what your goal is for your resource, if you want to have a very kind of fun, accessible looking resource for, you know, first year students or something, versus if you want to have kind of a more traditional text, online text kind of appearance. So I have the McLuhan, I think that is the default theme, and it's I think fairly good for just typical academic writing. Am I showing you? Yes, I have some notes. Okay, so I wanted to show you the export as well. This is a neat option. There are really a lot of choices here in terms of what kinds of exports, files the users can export. So I can choose which ones I want to make available. It even has options where some of the PDFs are designed for printing versus digital. So the print versions won't have the interactive content. I'm not actually sure how they do that, but they have options here. So what I would do is go through when I'm finished my book and ready for it to be published and all of that stuff. I select all the boxes that I want. In this case, I've chosen all of them. I click export your book and it exports files. And I have to say that process I found took about 10 minutes. So, you know, take a step back and sip your coffee and congratulate yourself on your completion of the project. And that's kind of how the export file works. We also have this import option here, which I will have you test out actually very soon. I'm going to skip publish. For plugins, The only one we have activated by default is H5P, and that's that kind of interactive function. But if you're comfortable with other things in here, again, this is where we get into more advanced settings, and I try not to play around with them too much because I am not a coder, but if you are, that's something you could, of course, play around with. I think probably most academics are not looking to get that far into it. I'm going to click media here as well on the left, and it's going to show me all of the images, videos, any media that I've uploaded. Now, in this case, I haven't uploaded a lot, but that's all available here, and I can upload new things. Did I want to show? Let's see. I showed you the users. I'm going to skip the tools and settings. Both of those are a little more advanced. And I'm going to skip H5P content for now, and hopefully we'll have a chance to get into that kind of as we progress through the activities so that we can develop a little bit of comfort with that. So that's kind of what the dashboard looks like. And from here, I am going to suggest that we start working through the activities. So the activities are listed on the handout that is PDF attached to this, to the chat that I think everybody would have received. Sorry, I'm just thinking somebody came in a little later, so I'll just double upload it again. Can't hurt. And there, okay, great. So you should be able to follow those instructions. I won't demonstrate the whole thing because we have instructions with screenshots and everything, and I don't want to kind of waste everybody's time with it. But if you have questions about kind of where to click and how that works, please don't hesitate to ask. We are on steps 1 to 3. So actually, maybe I'll take us to the slides and I'll just have you start working through that. So steps 1 to 3 have you logging into your account, creating a new book, and just ensuring that the new book that you create is fully private, not at all public, and will never be public, so that you can feel totally comfortable playing around in the book and exploring the different features. So I'll just move on to the next step. So what we'll do here is import a chapter. And this is covered in the next steps in the instructions. So we'll go through step 4 and then step 5 to kind of preview what it looks like. I just want to show you really quickly, sorry, where I will click to make that happen. Okay, great. So I'm back in the dashboard, and I'm just going to scroll down to the import function here on the left-hand side of the menu. So I'll choose import, and then I'm going to choose which file type. So in this case, I have a few options. I can choose EPUB, Microsoft Word format, and HTML is kind of the most commonly used ones. So this HTML or URL is kind of what we use when we're importing a file from the web. So I would just choose import from URL, and then I'll type in a chapter, or sorry, this URL. This is provided in the handout, so hopefully you'll be able to copy and paste it. And what I can next do is click begin import. So the reason I have you importing one chapter and not a full book is because it actually takes a while to import a full book. So we could do the whole thing, but it's a lot easier and faster. It'll just take a minute or so to import just one chapter. So what I do here is it's showing me the whole book and it's saying, do you want the whole thing? And so in this case, I'm going to choose the chapter that I want. In this case, I am going to suggest you choose the neuron. And I've chosen that chapter because it has a lot of different types of content in it. And I'm hoping that that will be able to kind of, as you edit that, you'll get a sense of kind of what it looks like in the back end. So I can go ahead and choose the chapter and scroll down to the bottom. it's important here that you select this box that says show imported content in web. Oops. So select that box and then you click import selection. So I'm not going to do it this time because I did it recently, and it will take extra time. So, but that's kind of the step, and it is described here in step 4. So I'll have you go ahead and move into step 4 and 5, where you kind of import the chapter and then go ahead and kind of explore a preview so you get a sense of what it looks like for the user. Okay, so I would say maybe another 5 or 10 minutes for this activity. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and demo editing a chapter. So I can either go into my dashboard where I kind of get an overview here, or I could go into organize. Either way, I can just click on a chapter. So I can click etymology or something. And I think actually I'm going to switch books. I'll go into a different book in my catalog because this one's published, so I didn't want to accidentally make any changes. This one here is a test book that I have, and I'll just open up the neuron chapter, which is the same as the one that I believe most of you just imported. Okay, there's a few things I wanted to highlight for you here. So the first is, of course, if I started from scratch, I could just type something in here. It's like any other kind of visual editor. So this is kind of like if you're typing a Word document or something. And I can, of course, highlight and bold or italicize or whatever it is that I feel I need to do to kind of emphasize certain parts of the text. All of that is available to me. I also wanted to show a couple of other things. So the first, it relates to accessibility. So I can highlight and use this formatting on the, paragraph. Here we go. This drop-down menu that says paragraph to kind of appropriately format my work. So for example, if I want this to be a heading or title or whatever, I can use this formatting as opposed to just kind of making it bold and large. I want to highlight it and use the built-in formatting, and it's the same in Word or anything else that you do. That's how we kind of make our work more accessible to screen readers. So that's kind of an important feature to be aware of. And then a couple of other things that I think are neat. One of them is, let me just say, let's take a section and say, I want this to sort of pop out. So I can use this drop-down menu here that says text boxes. And I'll just pretend this is an example. And I'll say, I'll highlight it and choose example. And now it's formatted as an example. So the benefit to this is that anytime I'm including an example kind of across my book or resource, whatever it is that I'm creating, the examples will be formatted the same way. It adds some visual appeal. I don't have to think about what color scheme I want to use. All of that is kind of built in. There is a way to customize that. So if you don't like the purple, for examples or whatever it is, you can customize it, but that is a little more an advanced feature. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend it unless, again, you're comfortable with coding and all of that stuff. So this is kind of, it kind of makes it look a little more professional and consistent in terms of formatting. So that's something I wanted to highlight. Was that it? There's one other thing I wanted to show you here. You don't need to use it at all, but I just wanted to make sure you're aware. Again, if you're the type of person who really enjoys coding or is comfortable with that, and we're looking here at a visual editor, but if I click over at the top right corner, there's this option to see the text editor, and you can kind of see what's going on behind the scenes when I add in all that formatting. This sort of happens automatically and I don't have to do it. But this is just something to be aware of. Particularly if I've done something to the formatting and now it's wonky in some way. Sometimes I can look in the text editor and just sort of get a sense of what's happened. So that's something to be aware of. So if I want to add media, this is where I can do it as well. So I'll click add media. And if I've already imported a file or uploaded a file, so we talked about like with the lecture, recorded lecture, if I've already uploaded it in that media section, it'll be here in my media library and I can just select it. So this is nice for things like images or audio clips, something like that, that you might use repeatedly throughout the book. So here I've put in my favorite cat picture here. So it's fairly straightforward. And so it kind of embeds automatically. This is what I can do with images, but also video or any other kind of multimedia content. And I can do the same thing in order to add H5P. So again, it's going to look at the H5P that's already available in this book. So in this case, because we incorporated an existing book which had H5P, an existing chapter of a book, I should say, which had existing H5P, it's showing me that one. If I wanted to create more, I can do that in the H5P section, and then it will show up here. But what I wanted to show is if I decide to insert this particular H5P activity, it adds this thing. This is called short code. So it's really, I'm not actually going to see the H5P activity myself in the editor at this point. But if I preview it, if I save this and preview it, I'm sorry, I'll just make sure this is formatted as paragraph so that I don't do anything wonky. Click save. Then when I preview it, and now I've played around with the formatting so it looks funny, but here is that quiz. So from the user's perspective, they see it as kind of seamless. Okay, and so that's kind of the next activity here is really just to kind of explore that editor. So to whatever extent you're comfortable with it. So I'll click admin so I can go back in and we can look at it again. Play around with editing the text. If you want to, upload a file, if you just have an image on your computer of anything, of, your cat or whatever, go ahead and add that just to experiment with it. And look at the other options because there are some neat options in here. This is where I would insert my quick law text if that was something I wanted to use. And you can play around with your formatting here as well. So maybe 5 minutes for this. Great. Okay. Perfect. Okay. So just before we leave, there's one thing I wanted to show you, and that is in terms of how to copy and paste material into the editor. And I don't know if you've ever found you've kind of copied content from one place into Word or something, and it comes with wonky formatting. And so in order to prevent that from happening here, you have a couple of options. The first is just to use Notepad. So copy and paste it into Notepad first, and then copy and paste it from Notepad into your editor here, your visual editor. That works. Another option is to paste all of the content and then highlight it and choose clear formatting here. So that will remove any formatting that might make it inconsistent with the rest of your text. So that is a common issue that comes up. So I thought I would share. And one other thing I wanted to share is just I really like how it shows me kind of revisions of the work that I've done. And I can come back in a few months and be reminded when the last time I updated the content was. So that's something that I find fairly useful. So our next kind of demo and then activity was going to be H5P. So I'm clicking H5P content here again in that left-hand menu. And I'm seeing all of the H5P content that I have for the whole book, which in this case is just from that one chapter. So I tend to think it's a bit easier to edit something that's existing than start from something new, especially when we're looking at a totally new software. So what I'm going to do here is have you practice editing. So I can see over here where my existing H5P activity is, and I'll click edit. And I just kind of want to give you a sense of what it looks like in the back. So you might remember this is a set of 4 multiple choice questions, and each question has 4 choices. And so I'm going to scroll down here, and these are the 4 questions. So I can click through them. And so what I would suggest doing is adding a 5th question. And so if you have something in mind, you can put in gibberish if you like, but if you have a question in mind that, makes sense for your students, or if you don't have a question in mind, I had a suggested a suggested question in the in step 7 of the handout. So you can go through step 7 and add a question here. So I'll just scroll through quickly to show you this is the title. This is where I add the different options. So it's showing me 2 options. If I want to add more, I'll have to choose add option here. I'll have to label which of the options is correct. So I'll just check the box on this one. And there's actually quite a bit of options here in terms of, for example, if I want to provide any feedback or hints or anything like that. And I can also scroll through the behavioral settings so I can decide if I want my users to be able to retry or not, if I want them to be able to see the correct solution or not. So all of that is kind of available here. And then I can click, sorry, half my screen is covered up by the chat. So then where am I? It's in update, sorry, up top. So I can click update. And then when you preview that same chapter that you've been working on, you'll be able to see the edits that you've made to the activity. So, so that's what we'll do for the next final activity. That's number 7. Before we do that, I do want to show you quickly what it looks like, just because there are so many options for different types of activities in H5P. So I'll just choose add new, just to give you a sense. In this case, because it imported a quiz, like we've already got the, I don't know, so software code. I'm not exactly sure how it works, but I've got that installed. But I do have to, if I want to try a different type of question, I have to click get. It usually takes a minute or so just to install the capacity to do that. And then each of these is editable, of course, and you could create a new one that way. There's a really wide variety of options here. Almost all of them are accessible, which is amazing because a lot of online interactive content it's not accessible to screen readers. So this is for the most part accessible. There are a couple of H5P activities that are not yet, they don't meet accessibility standards. And so H5P has some documentation about that on their website if you would like to look that up further. But for now, we'll just work on experimenting with our existing H5P quiz. And so I think we have, so this is described in step 7, and that's kind of our last step today. So after, if we spend, say, 10 minutes on this one, afterwards, I'm hoping we'll have time to sort of chat about any questions that you might have or different uses, different features that you might want to see, anything like that. Great. Okay. So I'll just take us back to the slides, provide some more resources and stop recording, and then we can talk a little bit more. We have about 12 minutes. So if we have time, we can talk more about kind of any remaining questions that you have, anything we've kind of skimmed over at this point, or kind of further support you might be interested in. So I just wanted to share some additional resources. So first, the Pressbooks guide, the link is here. I'm going to send you an email with these slides so you can open the links if you like. But it has kind of all the things we've talked about today and more with a little bit of detail, sometimes screenshots to kind of help you navigate through the process. So that's a really useful tool. The OER, the teaching aspect of OER is something that you can talk to folks at the Center for the Advancement of Teaching and Learning about. And I know a few of them in particular who've been using OER quite a bit. So again, it won't be kind of a strange question to them. They'll be comfortable talking about kind of different ways to use OER, evaluating OER for educational purposes, developing OER, all of that stuff. They should be reasonably comfortable with. And I found them to be great resources. And the same thing with the Copyright Office. They're fantastic for Creative Commons and obviously navigating copyright, all of that stuff. For finding OER for adaptation, I provided some resources early on. You can talk to your liaison librarians if you have a contact at the libraries that you've had a relationship with and would like to continue working with. That person can usually provide some support. And also you can contact me directly. I do have a little more experience working and specifically finding OER So you can contact me as well. My email is in the slides. And you can see here we are with as I mentioned earlier, this slide template is itself an OER. So you can see the attribution for it below. So I had fun with that one. So I hope these resources help. I am going to stop recording now so that we can kind of discuss a little further. And for anybody who is watching a recorded version, you can find all the resources that we're talking about today attached in the description. So thank you.